going through the desert. There were some members of the Jewish people who were spiritually impure. They had become contaminated because they had come in contact with the dead body, and so they weren't able to participate in the sacrifice of the Pesach, the Passover offering. And so they asked for some sort of, is there a path that they can take that they can also participate in that mitzvah? And Moses said, let me ask God. And they got 30 days later a sort of makeup mitzvah where they could do, it's called the Pesach Sheni, the second Passover offering. From there, the Talmud derives a law that 30 days before any holiday, 30 days before an event, that's when you start to learn about the laws, the customs, and understanding of the holiday which is coming up. So today is the 28th of Cheshvan. That puts us within 30 days of the 25th of Kislev next month, which is Hanukkah. So I figured maybe we can start learning about Hanukkah, learning the laws of Hanukkah. You know what? I'm not going to say law anymore. I'm going to say halacha. And halacha, even though it's maybe some people are less familiar, this is a word we should become familiar with. And I, not just because that's the Jewish way to say it, but there's a very important, this is what I love about language. I'm a big proponent of learning foreign languages, because the concept of language, which is so fascinating, is that you take an idea which is abstract. It's an intangible concept. You package it into some sort of finite package that you can hand over to someone else, and then they can decode it and then come up with this idea in their own head. The fact that we have the ability to do that is really amazing, but it's quite limited, right? Because this word, since it doesn't inherently carry the meaning of the idea that we want, we just agree on what the word means. But we each have our own idea of our own conceptual framework of what that concept means. And so therefore, for each individual, it could be a little bit different, but for sure in the language itself, there's much more of an agreement which could be limited. And one of the beautiful things about learning other languages is that it expands your way of thinking. It's not just a different way to communicate with people that live in a different culture, but it's really a different way of thinking, because words take on different meanings in different languages. And so I really prefer the word halacha, however you prefer to pronounce it, because we use it, I guess in English you would say a law or a custom or something that you have to do, but it doesn't really mean a law. In fact, in Hebrew it means a going, a way. And it carries, because in Hebrew there is a word for law, din, right? What if I would break something of yours and I was meant to watch it for a certain period of time, what would be the law? Am I meant to pay for it? Am I exempt from paying for it? That's law, that's din. But halacha is it's broader than that. It's about a lifestyle, the path that leads you to your spiritual perfection, that leads us to a goal. So that's what halacha is about. So I'm going to use the word halacha from now on. The halacha of Hanukkah will start, and hopefully along the way we'll glean some insights into what Hanukkah is all about. Okay, any questions before we begin? Okay, great. I'm going to be reading we're going to start with the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and then I'm going to go into the Mishnah Brura, which is written by the Chabad Chaim, and it's an elucidation of what was written in the Code of Jewish Law, which was very terse. But the Mishnah Brura was written around the early 1930s, and it's going to be a lot more detailed about what we're supposed to understand and how we're supposed to interact with the halachas of Hanukkah. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law says, B'chav Hei Kislev, I'm going to read it in the Hebrew, I'll translate as I go. B'chav Hei B'Kislev, on the 25th of the month of Kislev, Shmonas Yemei Hanukkah, we begin the 8 days of Hanukkah. V'asurim behesped v'tainus, and it's forbidden to eulogize and to fast. Aval mutarin ba'asiyas malacha. So even though it's forbidden to fast and be sad and things like that, things that are overtly in a state of mourning, and therefore it has a holiday status. Nevertheless, unlike other Jewish holidays, which are forbidden to do what's called malacha, these creative acts of manipulation of the world, turning on lights and things like that, things that are forbidden on Shabbat and other holidays, on Hanukkah, everything is permitted. Kind of, we'll see. The nogas hanashim shaloi lasos malacha ba'ed shaneres latkes. However, women have developed a custom over the years that they don't do any sort of work while the candles are still burning. And we're going to see that that's only within the first 30 minutes, which is the required amount that the candle should burn. But women have a custom to not do work. Now, this also, it doesn't necessarily mean the same guidelines as Shabbat. This custom is really more like housework, like not to do any ironing or doing the dishes or that kind of stuff that you would do in the home to take care of the home. Women developed a custom that within the first 30 minutes to refrain from that and just be with the candles. And there are those that say, says the Code of Jewish Law, to not be lenient about this, that this is a very important custom to maintain. Okay, so let's look into the Mishnah Berurah. That's the end of that first halacha. Mishnah Berurah says like this. He's going to give us a quick review of what Hanukkah is all about. We begin the 8 days of Hanukkah. That in the Second Temple period, there was a wicked kingdom that had overcome us, the Greeks. Gazru gezeres al Yisrael ubitlu dasam v'leihin nichu esam lasik b'Torah mitzvahs. So this wicked regime that had come over the Jewish people, they decreed terrible things on the Jews and tried to eliminate our religion. And that's an important point, our religion. They didn't try to kill us. This is a very important distinction to make. We'll juxtapose this with something else, another rabbinic holiday, Purim, in 1 second. But the Greeks didn't try to kill us. That wasn't their intention. They just wanted to eliminate Judaism. And therefore, they didn't allow us to study Torah and do mitzvahs, do mitzvot. And they tried to get involved in our culture and our lifestyle. They tried to get involved in our finances and in our children's lives, our education. They just tried to overcome our culture. And it went to the extent that they entered into the temple and destroyed literally destroyed its walls, but it was more proverbial. They broke down the cultural barriers, and they defiled the sanctity that the Jews had in the temple. And they caused a tremendous amount of difficulty for the Jews, and it was put a lot of pressure, a lot of cultural pressure. Until God had mercy on us, and He saved the Jews from the Greeks. And the children of the Hashmonaim, it was a family of priests. They often had the high priesthood, the Kohen Gadol. They reached out and struck down the Greeks, and we sort of paint the picture of them as being mighty warriors, but the truth is we're told that they weren't. They were the opposite. They were actually quite weak and feeble, and it was miraculous that they were able to overcome the Greeks. The Chazar Malchus Yisrael Yasser Masayim Shana ad Churban Hasheni. And the kingship, the sovereignty returned to the Jewish people for more than 200 years, until the ultimate destruction of the temple by the Romans. When the Jews overcame the Greeks and they won the war, that was on the 25th of Kislev, the month of Kislev, which is next month. And they entered into the temple after they regained control, they regained sovereignty, and they didn't find any spiritually pure jar of oil. They only found one jar of oil that was left, and it was sealed with the seal of the high priest. So it was assured that it was intact, that it was pure. But there's only enough oil in that jar to light for one night. And a miracle occurred that oil was able to last for 8 days. It's a lot of dispute about how exactly it worked. When they poured it, was only 1/8 came out and it filled up 1/8, or they poured the entire thing in and it lit for 8 days? Okay, it's a very technical discussion, but there was a miracle. It took 8 days for them to go out and find pure olives that they could crush and make pure olive oil. And because of this, because of that miracle, it's really twofold, right? The miracle of the oil that burned for 8 days and the miracle of overcoming the Greeks. Because of these two things, the sages at that time established a holiday. Now, this is an important point I want to make. They didn't just say, this is a big event, let's commemorate it. There's no such thing in Judaism as commemoration. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim was a great Kabbalist about 250 years ago. He explains how there's a divine energy to every holiday, right? For Passover and Shavuot, Sukkot, all of these things in time, just like in space we have holy places like Jerusalem, in time there's aspects of holiness, there's different energies to the timeline that cycles around every year. And there's a certain energy that takes place during the time of Hanukkah. There's a certain way to tap in. It's a unique aspect of divinity where it's dark and inaccessible, and there's one light that shines through. All of the ideas that we bring through Hanukkah, that energy is present, built into the time. It's just that until this period of Jewish history, it had been concealed. And at that point in Jewish history, when the Greeks had overcome it, that was the time of revelation of that divine light. And the sages saw at that point, through prophecy and what's called Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, they understood that there was a divine energy being revealed at that time. So when they established a holiday, it wasn't just a commemoration. Let's make a new holiday for us to celebrate what happened at this time. It was a recognition that God has revealed something to us, that there's an energy at this time that we're meant to tap into. And it's not a commemoration of that event, but through those events, we can understand and really grasp how to tap into what that energy is. Okay, so that's an important point to remember. So they established a holiday for the people of that generation. So at those times, even that first year, they made the 8 days that the candles were burning from that oil, they made those days into days of simcha v'halo, joy and praise. And then from then on, they established that people should light candles at the entrances of their homes every single night, the whole of the Laila, for the 8 nights, the haros legalos hanes, in order to show and to reveal the miracle, right? Because this is a holiday all about revelation. Who mitzvah midivrei seifrim, and it's a rabbinic commandment, kriyas Megillah, just like reading the Megillah on Purim. The Yom Elohim Nikroim Hanukkah, and we call it Hanukkah. Why? What does that word mean? It means to say Chanu b'chaf he. So the word Hanukkah, it actually means the Hebrew root for it is inauguration. And the simple understanding is because that's when they came back into the temple and they re-inaugurated it after it had been defiled. But what we're seeing here is another interesting thing that's built into the word. If you take the letters of Hanukkah, which is a chet, nun, vav, chaf, he, and you split it up, chanu, chaf, he. Chanu means they rested, and chaf, he means is 25. So chanu, they rested on the 25th of Kislev. That's when the war finished and they were over to overcome. So that's another built-in hint to the name. And because they're days of joy and praise, and since they're days of they're days of joy and praise, so therefore it's forbidden to be overtly sad, to eulogize, and to fast. And in the very end, he says, and poor people have a custom to go around to doors and collect for Hanukkah. And he says, and there's a reason for this. He doesn't say what the reason is, but he says there's a reason for it. Okay, I cannot be more than that. Let's continue. It's forbidden to, okay, he just says, he references another law. Great. Again, the Shulchan Aruch said that the women have a custom to not do housework, to not do any work while the candles are lit. The Mishnah Berurah says, Dafka Nashim, specifically women, and not men. Lefi shanas and nes al yadehem, because the miracle came about through women. Like we'll see later on in Sifes in the next halacha. So we'll see specifically how women were involved. We're referring to Yehudit, who killed a Greek general, a Greek officer, and it really turned the tides of the war. But by the way, this isn't happenstance. Basically, every single holiday that we have that's a result of a miracle came about through women. In fact, there's a general rule when it comes to mitzvot, commandments that are in the Torah level commandments, that women are exempt from a very specific kind of mitzvah. Positive, time-bound commandments women are exempt from, like putting on tefillin, tzitzit, all these things there's a specific time to do them, and it's a positive thing. Women are exempt. The reason, in a nutshell, is that, first of all, any negative commandment, doesn't matter what it is, implies a pre-existing connection to Hashem. Right? That's already there. You have a spiritual connection, just don't break it. So that applies to everyone. But positive commandments is when something isn't there. Positive commandments are, do this to build your relationship with God, to build your connection, to be towards self-perfection and towards completion, to mimic Hashem. And this is a whole other topic, which requires a lot more time to get into. But things that are time-bound is itself already a feminine concept. The concept of finitude and limitation is the essence of femininity, right? Masculinity on a spiritual level is completely unbounded, just near infinite potential of energy, but it has no expression. It can't do anything with it. It's just in the world of potential. And the power of femininity is to take all of that power, that masculine energy, which is useless in and of itself, and to condense it, to bring it down, to limit it, and then bring it to fruition, to something that's real. We can see how that plays out on a physical level when it comes to how men and women are different biologically in procreation. That what men provide is near infinite in potential, right? The seed, I mean, it's ridiculous how many seeds are released at one time. It makes no sense on a biological level why there should be thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of potential human beings that are being provided here, and only one is used. So that's sort of an idea of, again, it's a whole other topic. It's not for now, but it's a fascinating idea. And therefore, the concept of femininity is that power of limitation. And so therefore, being time-bound within this world, within the world of expression, is already a feminine concept, and therefore women don't need that as a rectification for their completion. And so therefore women are exempt from time-bound positive commandments. However, there are exceptions to that. And that's when it comes to these miraculous holidays that we have. That I think all of them, women are obligated in all of those positive commandments. And the reason the Talmud gives is because they were intrinsically involved in all of them. With Passover, we have Miriam, who It's not as clear, right? Miriam kind of gets shadowed over by her brother Moses. But I guess we'll talk about in just 1 second why she was so fundamental and how women were involved. But Miriam was involved in Passover. With Purim, obviously, we have Esther, who was the forefront of everything. Hanukkah, we're talking right now about Yehudit. What else do we have? Is that it for the miracles? So in a nutshell, the reason why women, it's again femininity, which is the forefront of miraculous salvation, is because the concept of femininity is also related to faith. Whereas masculinity is more aligned with what's called truth, emet. Femininity is aligned with emunah, which is faith. And faith doesn't mean just blind belief. What faith really means is you have, let's contrast emet and emunah. Emet is a complete revelation of absolute reality. There is no question about it. There's no challenging it. A beautiful analogy is you're walking through a dark, completely pitch black forest. And it's a bit dangerous because you don't know where the pitfalls, is there a fallen tree? Are there animals nearby? Is there a den? You can't see anything and you have no idea where the path is or where to go. In one instant, lightning flashes through the sky and the entire forest is illuminated. And you see every single aspect of it. You see where all the pitfalls are. You see exactly where the path is that leads you to safety. But as soon as that lightning comes, it's gone in an instant, right? So you had that revelation. That was emet. That was the truth. You saw it instantaneously in front of your eyes, but it has no endurance to it. It was just a fleeting moment. But you still saw it. Walking that path now, walking through that pitch black forest where all of that clarity is gone, you no longer have it, but you had it once. The extension, the drawing forth of that clarity of what you knew is true, that's emunah. That's what true faith is. It's not about just blind belief with no basis to it whatsoever. It's for sure not true. Emunah is drawing forth what you know to be true even when it's not present anymore. And that's an aspect of femininity. Again, this is a different class, why exactly femininity is tied to that and why masculinity is tied to emet, to truth. But femininity is about that emunah, that drawing forth through the darkness, through the lack of clarity, but preserving truth when it's no longer present. And therefore, women are always at the forefront of salvation because that's what it requires, that emunah, that being drawn forth, maintaining our identity and maintaining our connection to God when it's not clear anymore, when we're in the midst of darkness. And so therefore, women are always completely involved in our ultimate salvation. And we're taught that a woman will also, in the ultimate redemption of the Jewish people, be at the forefront of that as well. Okay. So therefore, women have a special connection to Hanukkah because of Yehudit, and they take on to refrain from doing work while the candles are burning. But Odshaner is Dokos, while the candles are burning, the Beso in their house, and the reason, on a surface level, why take on this custom, right? So, okay, women have a connection to Hanukkah, but why the custom of not doing any housework while the candles are burning? So the Mishnah Berurah says in those times they would have their hanukkiah, their menorah, inside the house, and as we might see later on, we won't get to it for sure, but there is a law that you're not allowed to use the light of the menorah for your own purpose. It's forbidden to use that light at all. It's just meant, it's holy. It's a holy light that's meant to just show the miracles. And you're forbidden to use it for your own purposes. And therefore, in order to serve as a reminder for that, women would just refrain from doing any housework while the lights were burning, to show that there's a holy light in the house, and to to not use it. Okay. And then he said that there are those that say that you shouldn't be lenient about this. This is a very serious custom that's meant to be preserved. Okay, so he brings a certain rule that there are certain customs that some people are lenient on, some people are not, and you shouldn't go to the people who are stringent and tell them that it's nonsense. You can forget about it. What he's saying is that for women that have this custom, even though there are many women that don't have the custom, that's not a reason to tell them to stop. They should continue doing it. Okay, it's a very beautiful custom. Okay, so that's it. Let's move on to number 2. Halacha number 2. You know what? How much time do we have? Yeah, okay. Let's do number 2, and then we're going to skip number 3 and jump to a different law. Halacha. Yeah, number 2. Ribui hasudas shemam behem heim sudas rishos. When people make a lot of meals on Hanukkah, it's not a requirement at all. It's completely optional. Shaloi kavom lemishta v'simcha, because Hanukkah is not about celebration in terms of us having joyful meals and parties and things like that. That's not what it's for at all. As opposed to Purim, which it is, which we'll discuss in a second. And there are those that say that there's a quasi mitzvah when you make meals. The reason why it's a quasi mitzvah to have a meal is because, as we mentioned, this was the re-inauguration of the temple. And not just the temple, but the altar. And there's a concept that in the Jewish home, your table is the altar of your home. In fact, the Talmud says that if you host a guest in your home, now that we no longer have the temple, we no longer have the ability to bring sacrifices on the altar, having guests in your home, the Talmud considers as if you are bringing sacrifices on the altar, because your table in your home is the altar in the temple. So therefore, since Hanukkah was about the re-inauguration of the temple and the altar, having meals at your table is a little bit of a mitzvah. But he says, in order to transform it into a mitzvah, it's not enough just to have the meal. You have to sing songs of joy and praise to Hashem. And yeah, that's it. He says to sing songs of joy at those meals and praise Hashem. And then that will create that energy together with the idea that it's kind of a quasi mitzvah because of the inauguration of the temple. When you make it into a whole situation where you're praising Hashem, then it turns it into a mitzvah to have a meal. The Mishnah Berurah says that they didn't establish Hanukkah to be a time of partying and joy. Elo lahalel u'lahodos, rather just for praise and for thanking Hashem. V'nira hatam deloi kavu kam l'simcha kamud b'purim. And he says, and it seems to me that the reason why this isn't a time of simcha, of joy, like it is for Purim, ki b'purim haya gzeres lahashmid laharagas gufa shehu bitul mishta v'simcha. Because on Purim, the Persians at that time, Haman, wanted to completely wipe out the Jewish people, to kill them. And therefore, since he wanted to destroy our bodies, that would, in effect, consequently ruin our ability to eat and to party and to joy. And therefore, since we were saved from that, our bodies were preserved and saved. So then we party with our bodies. However, he says, because in the times of Purim, that even if we would want to convert and be like the Persians, they didn't care. They just wanted to kill us. And therefore, when we were saved by Hashem, so therefore, when we were saved, the mitzvah became to serve Hashem by making a party, to enjoy our bodies, to have a meal, to eat, to experience life. Masha'en came b'maisa the Antiochus. Unlike what they did in the times of the Greeks, that they decreed upon us not to kill us, but to destroy our religion, to destroy our culture. And therefore, eating and partying with our bodies is inappropriate because that wasn't going to end anyway. And so therefore, what we do instead is that we serve Hashem, we serve God through a spiritual way, a much more or in a cultural way, by thanking Hashem and praising Hashem, showing miracles. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to bring out from that. Let's go to lighting the menorah. We'll go into a few interesting halachas about this. Seder hadlakas ner Hanukkah u'makayim hanachasa. The order of lighting the candles and the place where you put it. Now, a lot of what we're about to say right now is not really applicable because it's going to be things like if you can't afford enough oil for 8 nights and things like that. But we're going to go through it anyway because going through this is not about the practical telling you what to do, but seeing what the laws are, even theoretically. If you wouldn't be able to afford it, it gives a lot of insight into what the mitzvah is about. So let's look at it. Sarich lizar ma'od b'hadlakas neres Hanukkah, va'afilu ani hamisparnis min tzedakah shoyel u'moicher k'susay v'lekech shem anahadlik. So he says that you have to be very careful. He doesn't say this often. We don't find this in other areas of halacha, of other Jewish practice. He says, be very careful and particular about lighting the candles of Hanukkah. It's an extra stress on it. And even a poor person who gets his money from charity, he should even sell his clothes off his back, literally, in order to buy oil to light a candle for Hanukkah. Right? This is very serious. Literally, the only thing he has is a shirt on his back. He has to sell it in order to light this candle. Now, just quickly for the intellectuals out there, there's an interesting dilemma that could be posed. It's brought later on that if a person only has one candle and Shabbat is coming up and it's also Hanukkah, should he use the candle to light the candle for Hanukkah or should he use it for Shabbat? And the halacha is that he should use it for Shabbat. Because even though the publication of the miracle, the publicization of the miracle is extremely important to the point where he'd have to sell his shirt, nevertheless, if he already has the candle, lighting a candle for Shabbat is more important because it creates peace in the home. So if he only has one, he should light it for Shabbat. However, it's not a requirement for a poor person to sell his own shirts in order to have a candle for Shabbat. So now we have a dilemma. What if it's at the same time, Shabbat and Hanukkah? He doesn't have any money, he only has a shirt. So if you think 2 steps ahead, we're going to get stuck. If he sells his shirt, the only thing that would require him to sell a shirt is to buy a candle for Hanukkah. But then once he has the candle, he'll have to use it for Shabbat, because if he only has one candle, he uses it for Shabbat. So is he obligated to sell his shirt when ultimately he'll be using it for Shabbat, when he's not obligated to sell his shirt for a candle for Shabbat? Okay, this is a classic dilemma. I don't think there's an answer to it. But it's an interesting thing to think about and to bring up with your family. Okay, Mishnah Berurah says,
I think there is an answer to it.
Oh, let's hear it.
He needs to find a wife.
Good. Very good. Okay. So the Mishnah Berurah says, V'amrina b'Gemara, it says in the Talmud, Haragil b'ner, havyin loy bonim talmidei chachamim. Shneimar ki ner mitzvah v'torah. So this code of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch says you have to be very careful about lighting a candle for Hanukkah. And the Mishnah Berurah is saying why? Because it says in the Talmud that someone who is, it really says someone who is uh, regular in lighting these candles, someone who does it on a regular basis, he will have children that are scholars, that are great Torah scholars, that if you're careful with this mitzvah. So I read once that there was a great rabbi about 100 years ago, the author of Bucko, and he was very troubled by this law because he says, look, I know everyone in my generation is very careful about this mitzvah, and plenty of them do not have children that are scholars. So what does this mean? I mean, it's a joke. The Talmud's not serious. That's very difficult to deal with, right? So he says, of course it means what it says. If a person is careful with this mitzvah, they will have children that are scholars. So why is it that some people do the mitzvah with all the details and they still don't have children that are scholars? He gave an analogy that it's like you send a person to go obtain some object for you. Go to some other city and bring me back this thing. Now, this thing is very important that you bring it back. So therefore, I'm going to give you a reminder for you to get it. So he gives him a little pin on his shirt. He says, please be very careful with this pin. Guard it with your life, because this is what's going to remind you to bring back that object, which is very important to me. So the emissary goes off and he's away for a week, 2 weeks. He comes back and he's very proud of himself. And he shows the person, he says, look, I protected the pin, it's pristine. He says, where's the object? He says, oh, I forgot it. Great. So you protected the thing that's supposed to remind you, and you forgot the thing you're supposed to get. So he says, that's what this mitzvah of the candle for Hanukkah is. The lighting the candle is not what's going to change you. This is not the spiritual work. When you light the candle, you are meant to look at it, spend time with it, understand what it represents, and allow that to get into your soul, allow it to sink in and change you from the inside, remembering the miracles that occurred, remembering how Hashem is hidden within the world. That's the work that we're meant to do when we light this candle. So, sorry, you can be very particular, meticulous about lighting the candle, but if you forget to do the work that's associated with the candle, so you haven't done anything. That's a little bit harsh. It's not to say you haven't done anything. Going through the motions is, it's also something to preserve. But you're not accomplishing the goal. So that's what it means to be careful. I'm sorry, excuse me. Okay. Let's look at the next law. Kama neros madlik. How many candles are you supposed to light? The Laila Harishon madlik echad. Mikan ve'elach moisif ha'helach echad b'cholayla. The first night you light one candle, and then each subsequent night you light another candle. In addition to that, ad shabalel achron, until the last night you shemona, you'll have 8 candles on the last night. Va'afilim rabin b'nei abayis, and even if you have many people that live in your home, lo yadlik yoser, don't light any more than that. Each home should have a total of 8 candles on the last night. Now, that is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and that follows the Rambam, Maimonides. But Ashkenazim have a different custom. And the Ramah says, who speaks for the Ashkenazim, there are those that say, the kol echad mipnei habayis yadlik. Every single member of the home should light their own menorah. I didn't grow up with this. I'm Ashkenazi. My family was not very religious growing up, and we didn't do this. We just had one menorah in the home. But the actual custom for Ashkenazim is that every single member of the household should have their own menorah to light. Again, each single person starting with 1 candle first night, then 2, then 3, all the way up to 8. And that is the established custom. Each person should have their own set place for their candles, so there should be recognizable and clear how many candles each person's lighting. Because if you have, let's say, Nowadays, it's a lot easier because we have a menorah it's like one set object. But in these times, they often didn't have it. They would just have like a cup of oil, right? And you would just light a bunch of them. So if you would have them all lined up, let's say you have three people in your home, and then on night three, each person's lighting three candles, it looks like there's nine candles in it. And you can't really tell what does that mean, nine candles, right? So each person should have their own space clearly. And especially if you're far away, even if you have them enough, if you're far away and it's dark and all you can see is the little flickering light, so if they're all right next to each other, it's very difficult to tell. So they should be spread out from each other and placed in different areas. Okay. How much time do we have? Okay, we're good. Mikan ve'eloch. Im ein yada masagas rak ner echad b'chol laila oy leveisai yalta b'zeh medina. What if a person can only afford one candle? Right? We're all extremely wealthy compared to these times that they're talking about. So this is not relevant to us. But it's important to know that technically one candle each night would fulfill the commandment. A person can only afford one candle per night. He fulfills his mitzvah with that. The shi'uru the shulchan aruch hu rak limi sheyoda masagas liyos mehader min mahadrin kedis v'gemara. What the code of Jewish law is, this halacha is that is a requirement to how long? Ooh, let me get that. I missed it, and it's hard for me to bring up the chat. Whoever wrote that, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
I'm the one, it's Leslie. I was wondering with the man that couldn't afford anything, he had one candle he could get with the shirt off his back. Is there a certain requirement of how long a candle should burn for the Sabbath and how long a candle should burn for Hanukkah? Another idea is that could that man have taken that candle, divided in half, and say one would be Sabbath and one would be Hanukkah?
Good question. There is a requirement for sure for Hanukkah that it should be lit. This is controversial, but the way it comes out, just for simplicity's sake, the way it comes out for us is we rule that it should be lit for at least a half hour. And that's starting at sundown. Again, all of these times and the length of times are disputed, but for simplicity's sake, let's say light it at sundown, it should be lit from sundown at least a half hour. That's for Hanukkah. For Shabbat, it should ideally be lit throughout the meal, right? That would be the ideal amount of time that it's going to be lit for the entire time that you're eating. The candles should be next to your table, or at least within the same room that you can see them. That would be ideal, again, because in those times, they didn't have electricity. The candles that you lit for Shabbat were the light in your home, right? So that should be lit for the meal. But we maintain that custom anyway. The minimum requirement for how long it should be lit is a lot more lenient when it comes to Shabbat, right? Ideally, it should be lit for the for the whole meal, but if not, it's fine as long as you lit the candle and you intended it to be for as long as you possibly could. But for Hanukkah, there is a very strict requirement that it should be lit at least a half hour, and that's because it's meant to serve as a publication for the nace, for the miracle, to people outside.
Rabbi, do you have time for a follow-up question?
Sure.
Leslie, excellent question, and she made me think that I had it taught to me, and I wanted to check with you on this. This is a fascinating class, by the way. Obviously, we light the Shabbat candles 18 minutes before sunset, but it was taught to me that it's appropriate at times to light the Hanukkah candles immediately after sunset so that it enhances the fact that you can see the light. Is that accurate? Or is that something that I heard incorrectly?
Yeah, there are many opinions of when to light the candles for Hanukkah. Definitely not before sunset.
Mm-hmm.
At sunset would be the earliest time among the authorities. Some do it 18 minutes after.
Mm-hmm.
Some do it within a half hour after. It's pretty fluid. It's not such a big deal as long as you make it within that time.
I see.
Just to be careful here, when it's Shabbat and Hanukkah, so then you do light the candles before
Yeah, because you can't light after you've started Shabbat, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's great.
Okay. And please, if anyone has any other questions, I guess maybe let's, if someone wants to give me a reminder, maybe 5 minutes before the end of class, then we can open that up for questions for other things. So good. So if a person can only afford one candle per night, they have fulfilled their commandment with that. That which we see here in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, that it's supposed to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 8, that's called mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, which means there's a way to do a mitzvah, the way it's supposed to be done, and then there's a way to do it in a beautiful way, which is a little bit above and beyond. That's called mahadrin. And then there's mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, even more beautiful than that, going way, way above and beyond. And that's for every single, the way we rule, for every single person in the home, meaning really the mitzvah is just for one person in the home to light one candle each night. That's the letter of the law. But we don't do that because Hanukkah is all about going above and beyond, about beautifying this miracle that occurred. And so instead of just one person in the home lighting one candle each night, every single person in the home lights 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 8. Also interesting to note, this isn't going to come up in Halacha because we don't rule like this, but there is a dispute in the Talmud between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Everyone agrees that there is a number, 1 to 8. But the question is it 1 to 8 or is it 8 to 1? So Beit Hillel says what we do. We start with one candle the first night, then 2, then 3, then 4, all the way up to 8. Beit Shammai says we do the opposite. The first night, you light 8 candles, and then go down 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, all the way down to 1. So it's a very interesting debate there. And what they say is behind that, or what the Talmud says, the Talmud gives a couple different answers. But how do we look at the miracle of Hanukkah? Do we look at it from our perspective or from Hashem's perspective, from the perspective of heaven? And actually, this principle of how we look at the world, that runs through basically every single dispute of Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to see how that occurs, but there are many disputes between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, these classic camps, schools of thought in Judaism, these ancient schools of thought. And this was the difference. Beit Shammai focused on how reality is objectively from a heavenly perspective, and Beit Hillel is from our perspective, how do we see things? And that generates a lot of different halacha, a way of life, a lifestyle. How do we interact with the world? How do we see the world? So one classic fundamental dispute they have is which was created first, the heavens or the earth? And Beit Shammai says the heavens were created first, and Beit Hillel says the earth was created first. And I'm sure this goes much beyond the practical, which chronologically came first. The question is what is considered to be fundamental, right? This world only exists for the sake of spirituality. But spirituality only makes sense if we have a world in which we can accomplish it. So which do you focus on, right? So that's how this permeates into this halacha with Beit Shammai, and Beit Hillel about do we start from 1, go to 8? Beit Shammai says when we poured in that jar of oil and it stayed lit for 8 days, once you see looking back retroactively, we know that there were 8 days of potential within that jar. So that was a tremendous amount of spirituality. So Beit Shammai says, look at it from the spiritual perspective, the heavenly perspective, that on the first night, there were really 8 days contained there. And then it went down to 7, 6, all the way down to 1. But Beit Hillel says, no, we have to look at it from our perspective. And from our perspective, each day, it wasn't just another light, but there was each day that it continued to light was more of a revelation of God's presence from our perspective. Each day the miracle continued was even more of a revelation of God's involvement. So we start with 1, then we go to 2, then we go to 3. From our perspective, it builds up. So that's an interesting dispute about how to view the world. And of course, we rule according to Beit Hillel with everything. But in fact, the Kabbalists say that the Halacha, the way of life, goes according to Beit Hillel in this world. We have to go with that perspective. But in the world to come, when everything's revealed, everything will go according to Beit Shammai. And that should make sense. So let's continue here. Okay, one each night. So we've just explained, what if a person has 8 candles, right? If he only has 8 candles for the entire time, he should light 1 each night. In order to have each night, he'll fulfill the commandment. Now, ideally, 36, so you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 8. If he only has 8, then he'll light 1 each night. What if he has 9? If he has less than 8, then it's obvious. Like if he has 6, then he should light 1 each night until he gets to night 7. He won't have any, then he's exempt, right? But because he just can't. But what if he has 9? What do you think he should do? So if he has 9, yadlik b'leil sheni shtei neros. So the first night he lights 1, the second night he lights 2, and then on the third night he goes back to 1. Now, I could hear maybe someone would argue that it would be better to not go down, maybe save the extra candle for the last night. But it wouldn't be appropriate, because on the last night, you can't just light 2 candles, because the appropriate number for the last night is 8. So you have to light the appropriate number of candles, right? So, but now this is another interesting question. What if he only has 10? So maybe if he has 10, on the first night he'll light 1, maybe the second night he'll light 1, and then the third night he can light 3. Because 3 is the right number for the third night. And then on 4, he'll go back to 1. What do you think? Maybe that's what he should do? If he has 10 candles, if he has 10 candles, it doesn't matter. On the second night, he should light 2. So the first night 1, second night 2. On the third night, even though he has an extra candle, he shouldn't light 2, because it's not night 2 anymore. So he'll have an extra candle that he won't use if he only has 10. Okay, add shibalel achron, and from there it'll get a little bit technical. What do you think? Do you want to open it up to questions now for the last 10 minutes that we have, or we should continue with this and then take 5 minutes for questions? I'll let you guys vote. I'm not hearing a lot of opinions.
I don't ever think that we're on a timeline as close as what you're making it. So unless you are on a timeline, we're not.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so I'll continue. Someone doesn't have a lot of oil. If a person doesn't have a lot of oil, he should give one person Okay, so what if he doesn't have enough? So I said that, right, if he only has, let's say, 6 candles, so then he should light for 6 days, and then on 7th, not. So he says like this: if he has not enough oil for all 8 nights, he should put the full amount in the first night, and then divide the amount of oil he has for the other nights. So that's interesting, actually. So for the first night, he'll have the proper amount, which will light for at least a half hour. That's what we said. And then the other nights, he'll light something. It won't be for the full amount, but at least he'll have something for each night. And that's actually a novelty, because it comes out that on night 2, he could have lit the required amounts, but he didn't. And he won't actually fulfill the required amount for any of the nights after the first one, but at least the first night he'll have the proper amount. Oh, I'm sorry. This is only if he has not enough oil that if he would divide it all equally, then he won't even have enough for one. The if he has a tiny amount of oil, just enough for all 8 days, l'chavera in leklum, mutav shiadik b'chol layla echad v'yitin gam l'chavera. Hamidina ein tzarech ela echad, v'daf k'shachera in b'veisai. So here we see a very interesting halacha. This is fascinating. If a person has just enough, or he has, let's say, a little bit more than what he needs, and someone he knows, another Jew, doesn't have enough for anything, so he doesn't have any candles or any oil and he can't afford it. I don't know what the case is. Maybe he doesn't even have a shirt to sell, right? Because if he has a shirt, he's obligated to sell it. Actually, we'll bring that up for discussion to see exactly what the parameters are. But I'll give you the case. If you have more than enough, it says here you're required, right, that you should give your oil to someone else and not fulfill the what's called mahadrin min mahadrin, so that someone else can have oil as well. Okay, so we're pretending that we're all poor, and let's say you have 16 candles, like the movie. You have 16 candles, and you theoretically could light 1 the first night, 2 the second night, 3 the third night, and so on and so forth until you run out of extra candles. Mishnah Berurah says instead of that, take your 8 candles, light 1 each night, which you've satisfied the bare minimum of the commandment. Even though you have the potential to do it in a better way, it's better that you take those extra candles and give it to someone else who doesn't have any. Because the whole point of this mitzvah is to publicize the nes, to publicize the miracle. So the more households you have that are lighting candles, the better. He says that's only if they live in a different house. If they live in your house, then it's better to do it to ascend in order. But this is interesting, and I actually had a debate with someone about this recently. What is exactly the case we're talking about? This guy doesn't have. Who are you giving these candles to? Is it really talking about someone who literally cannot afford it to the point where they've tried knocking on doors, right? Because that's what it said. You have to go knock on doors and ask for money to buy candles. Someone who's tried that and they didn't get any money, and also they don't have a shirt on their back to sell. I mean, this is very. I can't imagine when this would ever come up. So it sounds like it's not that person. It sounds like they haven't taken the initiative to try to get candles. They just don't have any. Am I obligated at that point to reduce my mitzvah in order to give them a mitzvah, even though they've been negligent? It's kind of what it sounds like, but it's not clear. What do you think? Is that debate clear? Was I coherent enough in phrasing that? I don't know. It's very not clear here, and I was debating it with someone else. It's hard to understand that. If someone's not taking the initiative to step up for their own spirituality, so you could say that you're right. It's not about their spirituality. It's not about them doing a mitzvah. It's really my mitzvah. Because again, if the whole point of Hanukkah, of lighting these candles, is to make the miracle as public as possible, so then it's really a fulfillment of my commandment. It's better than, instead of me having more candles in my home, I can get more candles in other people's homes. Then that's an even greater publicizing of the miracle. Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
I guess so, right?
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, but how far does this go now? I mean, are we all obligated to find Jews that aren't going to be lighting candles and go send them packages of candles? say, here, light this. You weren't going to anyway, but now you have it, so just light it. Is that an obligation we have? That's hard to hear.
Well, wouldn't that fall like into the same thing as when you have like Chabad emissary?
Yeah, I was going to say that. They give out candles during Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Well, they give out candles during Chabad. During Hanukkah, Chabad goes around in their vans doing that.
Chabad does that, right? Chabad does that with a lot of things, but their mission is that's not in order to fulfill their obligation of publicizing the miracle. They do that because they're trying to spread Judaism to Jews, right? Like they'll do the same thing with the lulav. They'll run up to you, are you Jewish? They'll throw a lulav in your hand and make you shake it and put on tefillin, right? So that's like in general, that's their approach to spreading Judaism. This is a totally different idea. This is I'm not trying to make this other Jew religious, and I'm not trying to help him do his mitzvah, because he's not interested. We're talking about, is it my obligation, is it my mitzvah to publicize the miracle by having these candles in other people's homes?
Really quick, Rod had typed in the side chat, is it less of a mitzvah if you don't actually buy the candles?
What does that mean? How would you get them?
I think I would suppose he means if they were gifted to you rather than you actually purchasing them, is it less of a mitzvah?
So in terms of the mitzvah, the Hanukkah candles, it wouldn't make a difference at all. It's about the effect. Are there candles lit in your home or outside your home? However, there is a general principle called Sone Matanot Yichya. One who hates gifts will live. That in general, from your own spiritual health perspective, it's better to not accept things from other people. The more independent you can be, the more like Hashem you will be, right? Because Hashem doesn't take anything. Hashem is completely altruistic. The whole goal, the general principle of life is be like Hashem. And so therefore we try to avoid taking as much as possible. Now, I just want to be careful. That doesn't mean that you should refuse gifts from people, because it could be that an act of taking could be an act of giving. Right? If someone wants to give you a gift, it might be very offensive to refuse it. Receiving the gift could be an act of giving that person the satisfaction of having given that gift to you. Okay? But it depends what's in here. Are you want to take the gift from them, or are you graciously accepting it because it's a warm and loving thing to do when people share and give gifts to each other? Okay, that's a different idea. So in general, it would be better from a different perspective to buy your own candles and light them in your own home. But in terms of this mitzvah isolated, is it a better mitzvah to having bought them on your own? No, not necessarily. It's about just the effect of it being publicized in your home. Okay. Yeah, and this gets a lot more into other technical things which aren't as relevant. Maybe we can talk now with the remaining time, just some general halachas of lighting the candles and how to do Hanukkah properly. Where do you place your menorah? The ideal place to have the menorah is outside your front door, theoretically. Now, that's if your front door is facing the street where people will see, people walk by, people drive by, they have a clear view from the public of your front door, then the most ideal place to have your menorah is right outside the front door on the left side. Yeah, facing the door. If you're standing outside the house, facing the house, it would be on the left side of the doorway, meaning the opposite side of the mezuzah. Okay, So that's where the menorah should be. It should be at least 10 hand breadths high, which is about 80 centimeters. The candle should be at least 80 centimeters high, but less than, less than 10, but above 3. So ideally it would be under 80 centimeters, but not like right on the ground, but it should be low. And the reason it should be low is that it should be clear that this is, and again, nowadays it's quite clear because it's a menorah. It doesn't look like, people don't hang lights outside their home for light. But again, this is the custom, this is how it developed in Halacha, is that when it's lower, it's clear that it's not for lighting your entranceway. Because for lighting your entranceway, you would hang it above the door, you would put it at eye level, you would put it somewhere normal like that. To have the candles so low is clear that it's for some other purpose. And that purpose is to publicize the miracle, right? So again, ideally, the menorah should be the opposite side of your mezuzah, low in the doorway, but not so low that it's like on the ground. It should be on a chair or something like that, facing the street. So the question is, what if you don't have a front door which faces the street, or a public area, or if there's a gate or something like that where people won't see? Then it can get very complicated. I'll try to give a few general rules, but you can contact me afterwards if you're interested, or another rabbi, and ask specifically for your home where it should be if you don't hear it fit into the rules. If you don't have a doorway which faces a public area, so putting it in a window can also be helpful, but the caveat for that is if it's in the window, it should be not higher than 20 amot, which is between 30 and 40 feet. So like third story window is not good if people are only going to see it from the ground. Now, if you live in an apartment building that's like across the street and there are other people in the apartment building that could see through your window, then it could be theoretically on the 8th floor, because you're not publicizing it to the people on the ground. That would be too high for them to see, but it would be publicizing it to people in a neighboring building if they could have a direct view of your window. Okay, so that's the general principle, is that the candle should not be higher than 30 to 40 feet of people that you're publicizing it to. Okay, so that would be in the window. Many Ashkenazim developed a custom in Europe to light inside their house, not in a window, not in the doorway, but on their table or on their counter. And that custom developed because of danger. That is not the ideal way to fulfill the mitzvah, but in those times they had to, because if you were publicizing that you're lighting candles, I'm a Jew, this is my home, and I'm doing something religious, that would incite other people in the neighborhood, in the community, to come and attack you. So for protection, they would start to light in their homes. And that became a custom that a lot of people maintain this custom today, even though it's not applicable anymore. A lot of Judaism is just maintaining customs that our ancestors have. So that's valid. If you have this custom thank you for listening, Terry. If you have this custom of lighting inside your home, you are within your right to continue doing that. But again, if that's not your strict custom, and you would prefer to fulfill the commandment in the best way possible, that would be publicizing it to the most amount of people that you can. Outside the door would be best, or in a window. If you have something very expensive and you're worried it might get stolen, you have like a nice silver menorah, so it would still be ideal to do it outside. Maybe you could put like a lockbox, as if you're very into it. But again, you have a right to put it inside your home if people will be seeing it. Again, the correct time to light. I personally light around sundown, or a little after sundown. You can look that up. It's very easy for the time each day. And it should be lit for at least a half hour. Once it's lit, you may not move the menorah. It has to be lit where it's going to stay. So you can't light it inside and then put it outside.
What about relighting it if the wind blows it out?
Great question. it needs to be lit in a way that it reasonably won't be blown out. So let's say if it's very windy outside and you light it in the wind and it blows out in 2 seconds, that's your fault. You should have known that it wouldn't stay lit. Now, if you lit it at a time where it wasn't windy and it couldn't have been expected to have blown out, and some unnatural wind comes and blows out your candles, you have already technically fulfilled your commandment, and you are even not obligated to light it again. However, it would be a nice thing. It would be a nice thing to relight it, but you're not obligated to do it. You have fulfilled your commandment.
A related question, it's become popular in recent years, and I know we have one for these menorahs that are designed to be put in windows that have like screw-in bulbs that light up through electricity.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming, although I haven't looked it up, that is an addendum, is some more of a decorative thing, but that wouldn't fulfill a mitzvah in that case.
It's actually not so clear.
Okay.
If they're LED lights, for sure not.
Right.
But if they're incandescent bulbs, there are opinions that you might be able to fulfill the commandment like that, but it's definitely not ideal. So if that's all you have, and you woke up and it's Hanukkah all of a sudden, and you realize you don't have any candles, you don't have any oil or anything like that, so then you could rely on that, but don't plan on it ideally. It's much, in fact, in Halacha it's brought down, there's a whole hierarchy of what's ideal to use for lighting. The best way to do it is to have glass cups with olive oil. We prefer olive oil because that's how the miracle was done in the temple. We lit with olive oil. So as a remembrance for that miracle, the best way to do it would be with olive oil. Some have the custom to light with paraffin candles because the flame is very bright and beautiful. That's how I think a lot of Jews do it today. That's how I grew up in my home. I personally use olive oil because I think it looks very nice, and it's very special. But yes, I recommend olive oil, and if not that, then paraffin candles. The screw-in bulbs is a last resort, and it's only if they're incandescent.
Right, and I know I have a rabbi friend who lives in New York City, and they have like metal covered candles that they protect it from the wind. I don't know how to describe it, but they look like almost like lanterns, like a little lantern set, and they light them. And of course, they're Sephardic. I don't know if that makes a difference, but they put it on the ground outside their door, opposite their mezuzah. But they have a little apartment, first floor apartment in New York.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by metal covered.
Yeah, it's hard to. I'm trying to find a way to describe it, but they look like, I've seen pictures of it. It's like a trough that has these little lanterns, but they're like almost like encased in like a copper casing, and the light is inside. And like they open it up to light it, and then they're able to cover it so that the wind doesn't blow it out because it's wintertime in New York.
You see the light come through.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. Right.
Yeah, I've seen those. They look pretty expensive. I don't have anything like that, but but I was thinking about it because we were talking about the wind blowing out the candles.
Yeah. So also in terms of the actual menorah that you're using, so we talked about the fuel that you light with, right? Oil, wax, electricity. But in terms of what's actually holding your candles, there's also a hierarchy of preference for that as well. Silver is the best. They don't even bring up gold, but silver is considered, that would be ideal. Below that, any other kind of metal. And then under that, I think, is wood. Glass is like one of the lowest, which is very interesting to have a glass menorah. But it could be that was all cultural. It could be now that if you have this beautiful ornate glass menorah, that seems very nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to ask. Maybe it was made out of silver. I know that. I mean, this man was a certified posek in Israel, so I'm sure he knows what he's doing. But
yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
metal's good as well. Metal is one of the
Interesting. That's this fascinating information.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, it's been a great class. Thank you.
My pleasure. So I'm going to go now. If you want to send me an email, if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer that. My email is Chaim, CHAIM, @torchweb.org. Or you could ask any other rabbi that you know. I'm sure that's great, but I'll happy to be a resource to you as well.